How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Virtual History 360. I'm Mr. Wade, and we are live reviewing for our Road to Revolution exam. How's everybody doing tonight? Again, as always, I know there's going to be a delay between when I say something to when you respond, but go ahead and put it in the chat. Give me your name. If you are my student, if you're a Mrs. Ing's student, or you're just watching to learn, let me know. And we're going to have a good review. We're going to have a good time together. I hope everyone's ready for a good time. It is 7:30, a little after, and we are reviewing for our Road to Revolution unit. So, let's get started. I hope everyone's ready for a good test tomorrow. If you watch this live, you can ask questions. I hope everyone can hear me. Let me know. If there's an issue, I'm talking, you don't hear me, please tell me. So, hopefully everyone's ready for their review tonight. If you're watching this live, like I said, let's chat. If you're watching this on replay, hopefully you get something from this. I'll give everyone a minute to get on. I'm actually going to turn on my ceiling fan. Give me 1 second. Alrighty, so now I'm back. We're getting started, and Road to Revolution. Now, there's a few standards that we cover. The big one is 3-2, leading up to the revolution. We have the British Acts and everything that, made Americans, or the colonists, angry. So, this should be a quick review. Hopefully it helps you. And here we go. It's 7:32. All right. Again, I know there's a delay. Okay? I know there's a delay, but it's okay. Ask your questions. And if there's no questions, then I'm just going to go ahead and move through some of the material. Let's see what we got. Let's start with the French and Indian War. Okay, level 1. The French and Indian War was, really, the turning point, if you will, because if you think about it, the colonists thought they were England Part 2. England was okay with, just taking their materials. Remember the triangular trade that we learned about? But after the French and Indian War being expensive, things changed. Well, what about the war? What was the war? It was a dispute over land. Think about the Ohio River Valley. That's kind of like the crux. There was other areas that were disputed and fought over, but it really kind of got to start there. Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, that area was disputed between the French and the English. England said it was theirs. French are like, well, we're already there. And the English are like, well, let's trade furs with the natives. And the French are like, no, that's how we make our money. So no, we're not going to let you trade the furs. So they send correspondence, and one person that was chosen to lead a military expedition to get message to the French was a young George Washington. Well, he doesn't get good news. He gets quote-unquote attacked. Debatable. It was a diplomatic mission, the French claimed, but nevertheless, yeah, it got bloody. The French retaliated. Washington builds Fort Necessity out of necessity and pretty much makes every mistake possible. Build it in a low-lying area so the enemy could be in an elevated position. Doesn't clear the tree lines, so the enemy could get within firing range and hide behind trees. And they just destroyed them. It did not end very well for Washington there. Okay? All right. Got some people chatting. Take a pause. Let's see, Samra. We'll write this down so I can give it to Miss Ing. And we got Angelina. She's my student. Alright, so it ends up being, so who was the right country? Who was the right country? You're going to have to clarify that question. Who was the right country? Who was the winning country? England won the war. They defeated the French and their Native American allies. So there were some natives tribes that allied with the English, but a lot, because they were trading furs with the French, allied with the French, and they lost. Okay? The test is going to hit on all three levels, Angelina. Okay? Because it's for the whole unit, right? Okay. So where was I? Let's continue with the story. The war continues. There we go. Now, one thing, and I don't know if I mentioned this a lot, but a lot of land changed hands after the French and Indian War. We know that the French got pushed back, but the Proclamation of 1763 drew the line to keep the natives happy because the English colonists were no longer allowed to go west of the Appalachian Mountains. England gained control of Florida. It caused a mass exodus of people to move, emigrate south to Cuba because they didn't want to live under English rule because they were used to living under Spanish rule. But England taking control of Florida, drawing the Proclamation Line of 1763, it all kind of ties together, right? Who participated in the war was the British Indians. All right, to answer that question, who participated? It was the English, the British, fighting the French and the Indians. That's why it's called, over here, at least in North America, the French and Indian War, because it was England, the British, versus the French and the Indians. Okay? Hey, Jason's here. Let me write that down. All right. Let's see what else we got. I probably should have been wearing a different shirt now that I'm thinking about it. But, 1754, when the war started, this is when you start to see the colonies realize that they were separate from England. They kind of see the writing on the wall. And they realize that if there's a common enemy, they're going to have to work together. Right? So Ben Franklin, of all people, being a delegate from New York, said, hey, we should get together and we should unite to fight the French, or else surely France will win the war. Now, of course, we know England wins the war anyway, but Ben Franklin proposed the Albany Plan of Union for all 13 colonies to get together so that they could unite and work together to defeat the common enemy that is France. Now, as I told you in class, later, 20 years later, they unite against the common enemy. Turns out to be the British, but that's the next unit. But the idea of uniting so that they could defeat a common enemy goes all the way back, and we, staple it to Ben Franklin's Albany Plan of Union, which, remember, again, I wore the shirt before, but it's the flag with the snake that's severed into pieces, and all the different colonies are labeled on the snake, and it says join or die, because if they're broken up into pieces, the snake will die, but if they're all together, the snake will live. Good symbolism, right? How we doing? Check the chat. So the colonists did not participate. That's a good question. They did. It wasn't really so much the Continental Army, though, that you would think of, and when we get to the Revolution next unit, it wasn't like that. Were there militias that fought in localized battles? Yes, but it was the English, the British Army, the Redcoats, fighting against the French Army. It was a large-scale military war. It wasn't, guerrilla fighting that we're going to talk about later. Okay, so the colonists participated on a very, very small scale, but really it was England that was running the war, not the colonists. Okay, because remember, this was also being fought in Europe. It was technically, you could argue, it was the First World War because it was fought all over the world, over here in North America as well as in Europe. Remember, they call it the 7 Years' War, or 9 Years' War, depending on who you ask, in Europe. You guys always ask the same question, and the question is always, how many questions does the test have? It could be 1, it could be 100. Know the material. So you're being tested on, okay? To answer the question, there's 15, just like the last 2 tests. What was the Continental Congress Act? Again, the wording in your question is a little different, so I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're asking. The First Continental Congress got together as a way to support the colonies in, what's the word I'm looking for? to support the colonies in repeals coming ahead. That's not the right word. To support everyone in boycotting and protesting. Goodness, I couldn't think of the word protest. Okay, so the Continental Congress was formed kind of along those same lines of Ben Franklin's Albany Plan of Union, getting all the colonies together so that they could, just work together and survive a larger threat, right? Okay. Let's see what else we have. You need to know that the Continental Congress, since you bring that up, they were their biggest thing, like the biggest thing that they staked their claim to was no taxation without representation. Okay? Whether it be think back to the Declaratory Act that we learned about, that that Britain could declare any laws or new taxes for the colonies. Well, they said that these were not constitutional because there was no voice of the colonists in English Parliament. And they said, well, we are our own place and you're not listening to us and we have no say in what you're doing to us. Therefore, we shouldn't have to follow them. So, the First Continental Congress comes together and they're declaring that no taxation without representation. Without our voice in Parliament, you should not be able to tax us. Okay? Now, let me double back because I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Remember, all these acts and stuff came out of, again, level 1, the French and Indian War. England versus France. It's a repeated theme in history. And they, realized they didn't gain anything. Because think about it, the Proclamation of 1763 told the settlers to stay east of the Appalachian Mountains, meaning they didn't really gain any new land to make more money. If you don't gain money from a war, how else are you going to pay for it but by raising taxes? Well, the people in England were like, why should we pay for everything? The war was over there. So they raised the taxes on the colonists. Even without our voice, that they said no taxation without representation, even without our voice, they still raised the taxes to pay for the war. You could argue that it was fair for them to do that because the war was fought over here, so we should pay our fair share, right? But nevertheless, we said we didn't have a voice, so we were unhappy. Alright, Tamara, that's going to be a question for another day. Alright, so let's see. In my opinion, what are the main things we should know to become experts or to be ready for a test? Everything I'm saying. So when I'm done here, watch the replay, okay? How long was the French Indian War? 7 years, okay? So yeah, trust me, if you watch this replay, just watch this again. Wake up tomorrow morning, watch this 30-minute video. This will be what you need. Watch this before the test, okay? So what do you need to do before the test? This, what you guys are doing. You guys are awesome, and trust me, you'll do fine. All right? Let's see, what else we got to talk about? So again, why were the laws being passed? Like I said, it all boils down to paying for the war. But you got to remember, you got to pay for the war while still keeping your revenue up for everything else, right? So remember we talked about smuggling being a big thing and, people sneaking in. And I could share other examples of, the Gaspee affair, where a ship was sailing into Rhode Island and being chased by a patrol vessel, a British patrol vessel, and the patrol vessel ran aground, in shallow water in the Rhode Island, all those shorelines there, and they burned the patrol vessel because they didn't like the anti-smuggling patrols, where they said they could board your ship, to search your goods, so there's stuff like that, and all this turmoil going back and forth. It's so cool, like, just to know all the little details. And the idea of, if people are smuggling, then they're not paying taxes. If they're not paying taxes, we're not getting revenue. If we're not getting revenue, then we gotta raise taxes even more, and it just piles on to one another, right? All right. So smuggling was a big deal, because Britain needed to raise money. If they didn't raise money, because it's being smuggled, they had to tax other things. But again, the big thing was these were probably fair taxes if we had a voice. Now, I had a teacher when I was a kid that always said, well, what if they just sent, 2 colonists to Parliament? They'd be outnumbered, 400 to 2. They wouldn't have a a vote, that would change anything, but at least they would have a voice, right? And then all of a sudden there is representation. Might not be fair or equal, but at least they have representation, right? That was always a great what if in history, right? So let's continue. Let me check the chat. Let's see. Hey, Francesca's here. Let me write your name down. Alrighty, where are we at? So let's see. In your opinion, do you think, what was the most important act that we have learned? That's a loaded question, okay? Because the most important act, you kind of got to look into the butterfly effect of what comes after and what comes next. And I would argue that, that's a great question. I really like that. I would say, and you might think this is a weird answer, I'm going to say the Tea Act, okay? Because of all the other taxes that I would argue was fair, the Tea Act had the biggest ripple because they cut out the colonial merchants. And they said you could only buy tea from the East India Company, right? Well, because you could only buy tea from the East India Company, although the tea was cheaper, merchants were losing money going out of business, right? And they said, that's not fair. Don't tell us who we can buy tea from. We should be able to buy tea from any merchant, not just you guys, right? So, what do? They protest. You have the Boston Tea Party, right? Millions of dollars worth of tea if you use today's money. Well, then that ripples into the coercive acts, the intolerable acts, right? To punish Boston for the Tea Party. Well, the intolerable acts are seen by all these other colonies as just horrible treatment, which then unites them as a united front against the British, which then leads into the Second Continental Congress, which then leads to what we get into the next unit, the American Revolution. So, in my opinion, not to take away from all the others, I would say the Tea Act, which led to the Tea Party, which led to the Intolerable Acts, which led to the Declaration of Independence. Boom, there's my answer. Hope you like it. Now, by the end of this unit, people are starting to see the writing on the wall. We mentioned briefly Patrick Henry's, give me liberty or give me death. I kind of mentioned it in passing in my class. I probably went deeper in it with Miss Ng, but the idea that, people realized that, there was going to be a fight. It was just really a question of when. Because you had the Boston Massacre, where a few colonists were killed, but that kind of swells because the defendants were found not guilty. They were, acquitted on self-defense. But then that kind of calmed things down. Then you had the Tea Party in 73, but we're going to get to the First Blood, the very beginning of next year. We talk about the First Blood, Lexington and Concord, but, people see the writing on the wall, right? And not everyone is on board. The quote I always hear is that there was, 20% that were firm, ready to rebel, start the revolution, we are patriots. And you had about 40% that were loyalists. They made their money, trading with England. They're not going to want to lose that. And then you have the 40% that could go either way. And this is why I argued that the Intolerable Acts were such a big deal, because that 40% in the middle then sways closer towards revolution, which gives you 60%, right? So all ties together, right? But that, by all means, that doesn't mean war was inevitable. When you get to the Second Continental Congress, we read this in our primary source activity, the Olive Branch Petition did try to, stop the war. Say, hey, King, listen, we're upset. We want peace, but we need you to do this. And unfortunately, the King ignored it, which then leads into the next unit, okay? So, what do you got? Like I said, this is going to be a real short one. I think this shouldn't be more than 30 minutes or so. So, ask your questions. But I pretty much covered the story there. Let's see. I think Simon chose Boston Tea Party because it became some of the other acts. Yeah, kind of along the same lines of what I said, so good. Isaiah left early. Yes, you did leave early. It's okay. Today was makeup day. Just make up your work. Okay? What kind of things should we expect when learning about the Revolution? Well, I don't want to give it out away. We're going to be starting that on Monday. Okay? Who is the most important person to know about in this time period? Ooh, that's a good question, Jason. I would say, oh goodness, you could argue George Washington, because he got his start in the French and Indian War. You could argue Benjamin Franklin because of the Albany Plan of Union. You could argue Patrick Henry because he's riling up the Virginians. I would say those three. If you know those three, you'll be good. Okay? Let's see. So let me get my questions ready. Oh, goodness. This went from a short video to a long video, huh, Isaiah? Most important, watch the replay. But I would say the Tea Act because it led to the Tea Party, which led to the Intolerable Acts, which then leads to the Revolution. There's question one, right? What caused the Boston Massacre? Boston Massacre, hopefully you learned that in your group activity. You read about it, right? It was colonists arguing with the, at the downtown Boston, and there were guards outside the town hall, and they started going back and forth and throwing snowballs and rocks and ice balls and really throwing stuff that could, injure people, let alone the fact that there was, roughly 100, maybe 200 people in that little alley with 5 guards, and all of a sudden in the craziness, the guards fired into the crowd. Crispus Attucks, recognized as one of the first to be killed. Yeah, he, was the martyr, the person that got put up on the stage, but there were others who died. I think it was a total of 5 after all the injuries. But like I said, John Adams, future President John Adams, was the one who was their lawyer for the soldiers, because it's 1770, and was the lawyer for the soldiers and got them acquitted for self-defense because they were just defending themselves, right? So, yeah, what caused it? It was just a crowd that got out of control, and the guards feared for their lives. But as you learn, propaganda. Remember the Paul Revere engraving? If you're in my class, you see it on the door next to my desk, like in the back on the Miss Holness's room. That's Paul Revere's engraving. Not exactly what happened, but that was printed in newspapers across the colonies as propaganda, saying how mean and terrible and bad the British were. Truly an accurate portrayal, right? Were any colonists wanting independence before the acts even began? Probably. Again, there's the great story of George Washington leading up through all of this, of how he would, sell, whether it be the fish or his crops, and make money, and then send that money over to England to buy goods that he needed at Mount Vernon. And over time, the goods kept getting worse and worse, like the quality was going down, and he was getting less and less for his money. So he started manufacturing his own goods because he said, it's cheaper for me to build the stuff here than it is to send for it and wait for it to come back from England. So that's just one example, but I'm sure there was plenty of colonists that were feeling the same way. Like England was treating them worse and worse, whether it be the taxation, the government, whole country, or just the individual like George Washington saying, hey, I can make, my own blacksmith shop here at Mount Vernon, and then I don't have to, pay other people to do it for me. You're gaining your independence just in doing that, right? So I'm sure there was whispers, but the whispers turned to louder voices over time, right? All right. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to set my timer here. We have 6.5 minutes. 6.5 minutes, and then I'm going to end this, okay? Just because it's a relatively short unit. So I'm going to cut this off at about 30 minutes, at 8 o'clock. So if you got questions, ask them now, okay? Okay, so what did the British think they were doing anyway? Are you referring to the Boston Massacre? Because we're kind of all over the map right now. What did the British think they were doing anyway? I mean, they were firing in the crowd, but they were saving, they were defending their lives. People were throwing rocks at you, and there's 100 to 5. You're outnumbered. I think that's what you're asking. If not, please clarify. Francesca, so since the British won, they got to take the land? Well, they should have. That's typically how wars were won. The winner to the victor belongs the spoils, right? But they didn't, because King George drew that line, the Proclamation of 1763, because he wanted to keep the natives happy. He wanted to keep the natives from attacking, because he knew that if we kept taking native land, they were going to be upset, and we'd have to fight another war. So the Proclamation of 1763 said we couldn't take more land. Specifically west of the Appalachian Mountains. That was the borderline. How many years after these acts was the Revolutionary War? Well, it depends on which act you're talking about. The Revolutionary War, the fighting begins in 75, Declaration of Independence in 76. The last act, the Intolerable Acts, was 1774. Proclamation of 1763. So it really depends on which act you're talking about. Was the Stamp Act made to pay off debts? Yes. Yes, Angelina. It was just a tax to raise revenue, to make money. Okay? Let's see, it was the Stamp Act. How many years? Okay, I got that. Why did George Washington and other people who worked for the British eventually join the Revolution? I kind of got to that when I was talking about how he was being treated as a second-class citizen. He felt he was nobility. I don't know why my dog's barking. I think Mrs. Wade is home. He was being treated like a second-class citizen. So he felt that the British were treating him unfairly, so he was done. He was ready to be his own. So I think that's the best answer to that. What acts caused or had boycotts protest? I'm just going to say double check your chart on that. I mean, everyone protested. Some were boycotted, some were other forms of protest, but pretty much all had protests. Okay? Because nobody liked them. If they were happy about them, I wouldn't be teaching about them, right? Let's see. And when they put all the acts, why did they want to do that? To raise money to pay off the war. Because they didn't get anything from the war. They didn't get new land, they didn't get new riches and spoils. So they were in debt. Wars cost money. Paying for soldiers, paying for ships, paying for guns, paying for ammunition, paying for food, paying for travel. It's expensive. So they had to raise money somehow, right? What do I think is the least important act? I'd say the Stamp Act. I mean, it led to a boycott, and it was good, but really, I think that was the most fair of all the taxes that we talked about. So I would argue that while it is still important, on the list of 7, it would be number 7. That's just my opinion, though. You could argue for others. What else you got, guys? We got about 3 minutes. 3 more minutes, then we'll call it. So what do you got? Talk to me. Now, while you're putting the questions, I'm going to remind you, this is only a 30-minute video. Please watch this again. Please watch this again. Okay? Watch the replay of this. If you're watching this now, and you don't get a chance to ask questions because we're ended at 8 o'clock. Watch the replay, please watch the replay, because I trust me when I tell you I've covered everything really important in here. Okay, so if you came in late, watch the replay. At least watch what you didn't see. Okay. All right, we got some more questions coming in. How did the war start? The French and Indian War was, they were arguing over land. George Washington and his Indian guides killed a French diplomatic force, so then the French retaliated Fort Necessity, which then escalated into the British attacking the French and building Fort Pitt, and more forts being built, and yeah, it snowballed. One little fight turns into a big war. But again, if you go back through history, England and France were always fighting each other, so they were just looking for an excuse. Kind of jest, but it's kind of true. Alright, so Sandwich, you're good. Isaiah, let's see. Did any colonists before the main revolution start? Small battles against... when we get to... Tuesday, you're going to hear an example of the real first blood of the revolution, which wasn't Lexington and Concord. But that's the next unit. What is your favorite historical figure of them all? In this unit? That's a good one. I would say Sam Adams, because he organized the Boston Tea Party, because he held firm. There was other stuff on those ships. He didn't let that get tossed over. He didn't let anybody take the tea. He was strictly protesting the tea, so he only dumped the tea. Didn't let anyone take anything. It was run very well as a good protest. So I would argue him. Again, Ben Franklin, George Washington, you can't go wrong with them either. Patrick Henry, he's a loud voice. So that's something to think about. Level 2 was mainly just about the British Acts. Level 3 was the colonists' reaction to the British Acts. Okay? Level 2 was the British Acts. Level 3 was how they responded, like the Tea Party. Alright? Boston Massacre, protesting in the streets. Okay? Forming the Continental Congress to unite the colonies against Britain, to decry the taxes, to formally boycott. Level 3 was the reaction. Continental Congress was a big one, okay? Oh, you guys are going to ace this test. You're going to be fine. And again, if you watch the replay of this and just wake up tomorrow, watch this 30-minute video, boom, there's your homework for the night. Okay? But it is 8 o'clock. I'm going to say 30 more seconds because I know there's a delay from when I say and when I get the text, so I don't land it too early. But if you have questions, this is your last chance. Let me hear what you got. All right. Like I said, you guys are going to be awesome. Don't worry about it. You are here. You are putting in the time. You are preparing yourself. And that's all I can ask you to do. And you guys are taking this serious, and you're going to be awesome. Okay? It's going to be an easy 15-question test on School City. Just make sure your laptop's charged. Okay? All right. So it is 8 o'clock and 30 seconds, 10 more seconds, and then I am going to say goodnight. So, last chance, get that in the chat. Alright, so, please, please, please get your rest tonight, eat your dinner, eat your breakfast in the morning, come ready to ace this test, do well on this test tomorrow. Please have a good night, everybody, and I will see you. Bye, everyone.